Okay, so let's talk about the skill tier list for what you get at the for boss fights. I was very hesitant to put tracking in the core skills. Really, the only true core skill is energy rings. Uh, Basically, you want to sit right in front of the boss with a bunch of all your energy rings hitting the boss. The reason why tracking helps is because it slows down your rings, allowing them to spend more time on top of the boss, therefore hitting it more times. There, I decided to ultimately put tracking as a core skill because there is one boss, particularly the Scythe Mage, where I would say tracking is more important than rings because you are generally staying far away unless you're absolutely a god at dodging it, which I am not. In the amazing tier, these are skills that you always want to take, almost always, I should say. Uh, if you have the Oracle Chaotic Helmet, I would say the laser is the best skill to take. So if you have to choose between laser and multi-shot, choose the laser. If you do not have Chaotic Oracle, choose multi-shot. Um, Probably the next best is side arrows, followed by short range. Pierce does not appear in regular boss fights. It only appears in campaign and some events. But I do want to list it here. The reason why laser is so good is because it adds to the maximum number of ticks that the ring can that the ring can apply to the boss. So essentially, it adds a number of times the ring can hit. I believe without laser, the ring disappears after 4 hits. I could be wrong, and with laser, it disappears after 7 or 9, something like that. What Pierce does is it completely removes that limit. So if you have something like wall bounce, you can have the ring bounce forward and backwards and keep hitting. The same ring will keep hitting the boss for as long as it appears. I should go back and mention one thing about these two skills. Since they're both epic, there is a chance you get offered both at the same time. In most cases, I would say it's correct to pick rings over tracking. However, I like to risk it. There is one consideration, and that is that you can get rings from Valkyries, but you cannot get tracking from Valkyries. So if I get offered rings versus tracking in the early stages of the skill draft, I tend to take tracking because I'm relying that there are many opportunities for me to get the ring later. However, let's say I've reached my seventh or eighth pick and I get tracking versus rings. In that case, I will not risk it and I'll just pick the rings because it will give me much more damage than tracking. Okay, moving on to the next tier, which is the great tier. I would say out of this tier, the best skill here is the ring because it increases. It is a damage multiplier. I believe it's 10 or 20% extra damage that you deal to the boss. These are pretty self-explanatory. Attack speed, damage, movement speed, all great. I could possibly rank long shot above the potions. The reason a long shot is good is it's another damage multiplier. So all of these other skills, like the trifecta, warrior's soul, and whatever this is called, they are damage. They add damage additively, whereas this is multiplicatively. Even if you're attacking at melee range, this is a 10% increase in damage. It's 10 to 40% depending on how far you are from the enemy, but since again we're going to be hugging the boss, it's this is a 10% boost. And this is only a common skill, so it doesn't even take up it doesn't even compete with many other things for a good skill. The only thing it really competes with are the two potions, invulnerability and the attack speed potion. I personally like them a lot. I take them both almost most of the time. I would say this is the best defensive skill in the boss fights because especially if you can time it in a way that you can absorb projectiles, um, especially projectiles that bounce around and can come back to hit you. So if you just take this right before the boss launches them and then just eat all of them, there's nothing to hit you. These two are just damage. I am not sure about the placement of this this skill with giant strength or whatever it's called. It might actually be considered a lower tier skill because it slows you down, makes you bigger, so it makes you an easier target to hit. So I am iffy about placing it here. Maybe it should be moved to the good tier. Stand your ground is an absolutely fantastic skill. However, in most cases, you don't have the option of standing still very long. If you did, this would be in that tier above. This skill, I forget what it's called, but it gives you extra damage to bosses. It doesn't appear in your regular guild or seal fights, so yeah, not that great because it doesn't appear, but if it did, it would be a pretty decent skill. And finally, I have the back arrow. Notice I don't have the front arrow, it's all the way down here. We'll get to that. The back arrow just adds another projectile. Sometimes it's a little bit clunky with rings because they take a little bit too long to wrap around if you have tracking. But it's still pretty good amount of damage. It might actually might be actually better placed in the good tier, but it's more or less so. It's not a bad pick at all. Actually, yeah, now that I think about it, it should probably be behind the elemental skills. Okay, next up, weapon detach. Really, you should be using Thor because of the weapon detach. This weapon detach, the skill weapon detach, it significantly decreases your attack speed and damage, and doesn't it allows you to attack at all times, which for some bosses that you need to dodge at all times is absolutely fantastic, but for others it's actually bad. For example, the rock boss or the snake boss, you really don't want to take this even if you don't have Thor. You're actually much better off attacking with your regular weapon. So this is a fringe scenario. I just my advice is just take Thor. Okay, in terms of the elemental skills, and as you notice, I've bumped the poison skill down, and I'll explain why. The best single target damage is probably going to be fire. The fire ticks stack, so the more times you hit the boss with fire, the more damage over time it takes. Lightning is also a good source of damage. It's a little bit better for mobs because it jumps from mob to mob. Freeze doesn't really do much damage, but what it does is it disables and resets the boss, which could be good. The same thing is actually true for Lightning. Lightning does stun and therefore resets some of the bosses. Reset could be a good, but it also could be a bad thing. You kind of need to learn how each boss behaves to know whether that's worth it. Okay, next up I have the projectile split. Just like the Oracle piece of gear, I think it was the weapon, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't really matter. What this does is once the projectile's life ends, it splits into smaller, less damaging projectiles. This synergizes really well with short range, and thanks to 2TD for pointing that out. When the ring reaches the end of the short range radius, it breaks and it releases all of the small projectiles. And if the boss is right at the edge of this ring, all the small projectiles will end up hitting the boss. Next up are two defensive skills. I'm personally not a big fan of the shield in boss fights. I'm not even sure if you can get it, actually. It's a fantastic skill for campaign and for tower. For boss fights, you really just want to do as much damage as possible, and usually, since this is a legendary skill, it's competing with some pretty significantly with skills that increase your damage drastically, like laser and multi-shot. So generally, it's not that great, but it's not a bad pick. Again, I'm not even sure you can get it in CO boss and the guild boss fights. You should be playing Cat, but if you're not, the speed boost is absolutely fantastic, right? It allows you to do dodge projectiles, therefore staying alive. And I'm listing this extra potion skill up here. The reason I find this absolutely great is if you have the attack speed potion, this essentially gives you 100% attack speed uptime. And you end up with about maybe 50-ish% invulnerability uptime, which is absolutely fantastic. You're able to dodge some or absorb so many hits that that would otherwise kill you. The next up, we have the damage boosts for lightning and fire, but not cold because cold doesn't really do that much damage. Lightning and fire do. And next, I have the two skills that give luck. And you're like, wait, what are these doing? Especially this skill. This skill doesn't really do much. It just gives you luck and it removes projectiles when you get hit, but if you get hit, you die anyway, so what's the point? Well, oops, sorry. The point is the luck. What luck does is it increases the chance that proc that on-hit abilities have, such as Drax healing, but it also increases elemental critical chance. So if you're running an elemental build, this is a source of critical strike. And I guess same with this one, but this one doesn't give dodge and it gives less luck, therefore it's not as good. Um, Next up, we already talked about the rear arrow. Next up, we have the acceptable tier. This is a decent damage boost. This is again, you won't find this in your guild boss fight or CO boss fight, but in some events this will be there. It's a decent damage boost, and it's gives you guarantees a, a devil, which can sometimes will give you a great skill. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, I think Lightwing Arrow might be in the good tier. It's a little bit of a iffy situation. It does give you extra pierce, so it will allow your rings to hit a little bit more often, but un it's not a guarantee that you get a light arrow. That's why I'm not sure it's exactly where to place it. The damage boost is okay, but nothing to write home about. I have the bounce. Now, the bounce might be in a conditional skill. The reason is you need to be able to bounce the rings, and if you don't have tracking, any kind of bounce will just go and not actually hit the boss again. So it's not that good if you don't have tracking. And if you have short range, odds are your projectiles aren't really bouncing because they're not reaching the walls to begin with. So the bounce is a little iffy, but it's not necessarily a bad skill to take. Poison just does not do much damage. It just doesn't. That's all. That's why it's acceptable. Uh, I'm an elemental build, so it's not absolutely garbage, but if you're not an elemental build, don't even take this. This would be in the garbage tier. Super poison and super cold, they enhance poison and cold damage, but those already don't do much, so they're not very good. This skill, the one that gives you attack speed when you're low on low health, is okay. The reason it's only okay is because during these boss fights, a lot of hearts drop, and you naturally end up picking them up. So if the boss hits you, gets you down to 1 health, and then just by dodging, you end up picking them back up, and your health goes above 50%, and this gets disabled. And the next time the boss hits you, you die. So it's nice if you can avoid the hearts, but it usually doesn't last very long. Uh, the life, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You screw up, you get another chance. Everybody screws up. That's fine. This is the shrink. I'm not sure what it's called. Dwarf, I think, something. This is the one that shrinks you and gives you movement speed and dodge. Just makes you harder to hit. Right, increases survivability. Overall, good. This is attack speed and movement speed. Attack damage, attack speed, movement speed. All those are fine. Now, why did I put these absolutely garbage tier skills in the acceptable column? These meteor potions don't do any damage. Even if you're a meteor build, they are absolute garbage. the reason I put them in is that if you take these, they do not dilute the skill pool. The only skill that these add is the extra potion skill. If you take any of these, Circle, Sprite, Meteor, or Strike skills, they will add other Circle, Sprite, Meteor, or Strike skills to the pool. These do not. These only add the extra potions, which honestly, a lot of the time you're going to have one of these two potions, so that's not a bad thing. So if you're stuck between having to pick three absolutely garbage skills and you cannot reroll, pick the meteor potions. You don't have to collect them. They're just there to be removed from the skill pool. Now let's talk about the conditional. Most of them are relatively self-explanatory. If for some reason you are a circle build, I am guessing these circles might be better than a lot of these skills, or maybe even some of the skills in the good tier. Same thing if you're a sprite build or a strike build. I think meteor builds are absolutely garbage in boss fight. They're phenomenal for arena, but boss fights just avoid meteors altogether. So yeah, don't do meteors. They should probably be in the worse than nothing tier. I would just, if you all you have is meteor skills, just no matter what, just skip the level up. The only skill that's a little bit interesting here is whatever this is called, with the one that gives you attack speed but removes some of your attack damage. It also makes your projectile smaller. If you have rings, I would advise against taking this. However, if you only have laser plus tracking, this is not a bad option because laser already takes time to charge up. This charges it up quickly. And since the size of the projectile for the laser doesn't actually matter in terms of how many times it will hit, whereas with the rings it does, because a bigger ring will be more likely to hit the enemy. It's actually not that bad. If I have a bunch of other attack speed skills like close range or these two skills together, I will still not take this skill because of the drop in damage. But if I don't, if this is my only attack speed skill, I'll take it. It's not that big of a deal. Next, we have the bad skills. They don't really add much. You can argue that slow aura makes it a little bit easier for you to dodge. That's fine. It's true. I sometimes take it. But these just add health. Health doesn't do anything on boss fights. You get one-shotted anyway. But if it's between the bad skills and one of these conditional skills, as I like to call them, I would still pick the bad skill because it won't dilute the pool by adding a bunch of other sprite, circle, and sword skills. And finally, the worse than nothing skills. Literally, just don't take these. Let's start with the charged arrow. It is the absolute worst skill. It will reduce, because it makes your rings move faster, they will move through the boss a lot faster and not hit it as many times. The end result, it's something that I tested. If you take rings plus charged arrow, you will have a 30% drop in damage versus rings alone. That's terrible. Now the next one is a little bit counterintuitive, the front arrow. And you're thinking, oh, but great, a front arrow, that's another projectile, right? Well, yeah, in some cases, actually even good to take. But something that you need to know is that every front arrow you take lowers the individual projectile damage by 15%. So if you already have full Oracle set with 4 extra arrows, or rather, I should say the Oracle chest that gives you 4 extra arrows, this doesn't actually add any damage. You end up being right around the same damage if you take it or not, and any additional projectile on top of that will actually you will end up doing less damage than you did if you didn't take it. So the only time you take this is if you have less than 5 projectiles, essentially. Actually, at 5 it's still technically okay, but I would just not do it. And since I'm an Oracle user, I just never touch this. And that's pretty much it for the skills. There is one more skill that's available only in events, and that I will put in the amazing tier, or maybe, and that is the skill that slows your arrows down and makes them bigger. The reason it's so good is for the same reason why tracking is so good. It just allows the rings to stay on top of the boss longer and do extra damage. And yep, that's for the skills, and I guess the next videos would be the individual boss fights.